The old study still smelled of pipe tobacco and worn leather. Dust floated in the shafts of light cutting through the curtains, giving the room a ghostly feel. My father's chair sat empty behind the large oak desk, but I could still hear his voice echo in my memory. Firm, fair and always resolute. He had passed just a week ago. The silence since then had been deafening. Elliot, my elder brother by 5 years, stood near the fireplace with a tumbler of whiskey, already acting like the lord of the manor. I sat across from our solicitor, Mr. Hawthorne, whose brow furrowed as he unfolded the will. "I'll read the final testament of Mr. Edmund Whitmore," he announced. My stomach twisted. My father had always promised to leave the estate equally to both of us. Me, the quiet daughter who took care of him after his stroke, and Elliot, the charming golden boy who only returned when summoned. But as Mr. Hawthorne read aloud, my heart sank. To my son, Elliot James Whitmore, I bequeath the entirety of the Whitmore estate, including the property, assets and personal holdings. The words became a blur. I turned to Elliot, whose smug smile deepened with every sentence. And to my daughter, Anna Louise Whitmore, I leave a keepsake box, stored in the attic, containing personal effects and memories. That was it. No mention of our father's promises. No mention of the business we rebuilt together. Just a box. A bloody box. Mr. Hawthorne folded the will and looked at me, his eyes apologetic. "I'm terribly sorry, Miss Whitmore. This is the document your father signed, dated just a fortnight before his passing." Elliot raised his glass in mock sympathy. "Perhaps he changed his mind, sis. Age does funny things to memory, doesn't it?" But my memory wasn't fading. I remembered our father's exact words not 3 weeks ago. "It's all yours, Anna. You were the one here. You kept me alive." So how had the will changed? That night, I climbed into the attic. The box was there, just as described. Inside were photographs, a silver locket, a faded journal, and a small USB drive taped beneath the lid. I stared at it, my fingers trembling. What could be on this? The USB drive was ancient, scratched, discolored, and weighed nothing in my hand. I hesitated. There was something sacred about the box, as if my father had packed it himself in a final attempt to say the things he never could. Part of me wanted to hold off, to savor whatever messages he might have left. But another part, the part he'd nurtured in me, the side that questioned everything, wouldn't let me wait. I crept down to my room and locked the door. My laptop flickered to life and I inserted the drive. A single file appeared on the screen. March 14th, Study.mov. The date struck me cold. That was the day Elliot flew in from Oxford, unannounced. The day my father spent most of the morning confused, forgetting his breakfast and mistaking me for Mum. That day had felt off, but I never questioned why. I double-clicked the video. The screen lit up with grainy black and white footage, security camera style. The angle was high, from the corner of the study, pointed straight at the desk. Dad was in his armchair, head slumped slightly to one side, eyes barely open. A nurse stood in the corner, watching quietly. Then Elliot walked in, dressed in his usual smugness, carrying a leather folder. I leaned closer. He sat at the desk and pulled out a set of papers. Legal looking. He said something to the nurse, who nodded and helped Dad sit up straighter, though his head lolled like he could barely stay awake. "Just sign here, Dad," Elliot said in the video, tapping the paper with a pen. "It's just a medical form. Authorizing the new nurse. Nothing serious." My breath caught. The video showed Dad blinking slowly, his hands trembling as he took the pen. He looked down but didn't read a single word. He signed. The camera didn't blink. It caught everything. After Dad had finished, Elliot pulled the paper away quickly and slipped it back into the folder. Then he turned to the nurse again. "Right. That's all. Cheers." The nurse left. Elliot waited until the door closed. Then he exhaled, smirked, and said to no one in particular, "There. That should settle things nicely." I paused the video. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from fury. This wasn't just manipulation. It was fraud. That will had been signed under false pretenses. My father hadn't been lucid. He hadn't even known what he was signing. The entire estate had been stolen in front of a camera. I replayed it 3 times, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Then I did what anyone would do. I copied the file to my desktop and hid the USB back in the box. Not even Elliot could suspect I had it. The next morning, I visited Mr. Hawthorne. I didn't tell him what I had, not yet. But I asked to see the will again. Up close. Every page, every signature. He gave me a puzzled look, but complied. I scrutinized every detail, then casually asked, "Was this witnessed by the nurse on March 14th? Mr. Hawthorne checked his notes. Yes. A Miss C. Beechcroft. Hired temporarily from Lancaster Home Care. That name stuck. I'd never met a Beechcroft during Dad's care. Would I be able to speak with her? I asked. He frowned. Unusual request, but I suppose I could make an inquiry. Outside, I pulled my coat tighter around me. My heart pounded. If I could find this Miss Beechcroft, I could prove Elliot's lie. But something told me this wouldn't be easy. When I arrived back at the house, I found my bedroom door ajar. And the box was gone. The sight of the empty drawer stopped my breath. I dropped to my knees, yanked it all the way out, and thrust my hand into the back, in case the box had somehow slipped behind the frame. Nothing. My bed, my wardrobe, even the bin. I tore through everything like a madwoman. Still nothing. The box was gone. So was the USB. My mind spun. Who had been in the house? Elliot was at a meeting with the solicitors that morning. I'd seen the calendar invite. Mum hadn't left her room all day. The only people who had access to my bedroom were family. Or someone with a key. Or someone Elliot had paid. I felt sick. He must have guessed. Or worse. He already knew what was in the box and had been waiting for the chance to take it. But if he knew, why hadn't he destroyed the original footage? I rushed to my laptop, hoping I'd saved a copy in time. Relief flooded me as the file blinked to life on the desktop. But my heart rate didn't slow. If Elliot knew I had the footage, he would stop at nothing to bury it. And bury me with it. I needed to find the witness. Miss Beechcroft. Mr. Hawthorne had promised to make inquiries, but I wasn't waiting. I drove straight to Lancaster Home Care, tucked away in a sleepy part of Kendal. The office was bland, gray walls and the scent of disinfectant heavy in the air. A young receptionist looked up from her screen and smiled politely. "I'm trying to locate a temporary nurse," I said. "Miss C. Beechcroft. She worked one shift at my father's house on March 14th. I believe she was sent through your agency." The receptionist frowned and began tapping on her keyboard. "Can you confirm your father's name and the address, please?" I gave them both. More typing. Her brow furrowed deeper. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "We've got no record of a Beechcroft working here. And on that date, we didn't send anyone to that address. Are you quite sure about the name?" I nodded, feeling ice crawl up my spine. "I saw her. On camera." She introduced herself as Miss Beechcroft. She gave a helpless shrug. "I'm really sorry. That name doesn't exist in our files." Back in my car, I sat frozen behind the wheel. If Lancaster hadn't sent a nurse, who was that woman? An actress? A friend of Elliot's? Or worse, someone paid under the table to play the part of a witness, knowing full well she was helping commit fraud? I dug out the video again, watching her face more closely. She was late 30s, plain uniform, mouse brown hair tied in a tight bun. No name badge. No agency branding. Nothing that would identify her. She could have been anyone. I sent a copy of the image to a friend who worked in security, asking if they could run facial recognition through any open databases. It was a long shot, but I had no better leads. When I returned home, Mum was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, face unreadable. "I heard you were in Dad's study," she said quietly. I hesitated. "Just going through some of his things. I found something he left for me." She frowned. "You shouldn't go looking for ghosts, darling. Your father made his wishes very clear." I swallowed hard. Did he? Or did Elliot make them for him? Her lips pressed tight. "That's a horrible thing to say." I didn't argue. There was no point. Not until I had proof that couldn't be ignored. That night, I barely slept. I kept the file open on my laptop, as though staring at it would keep it safe. I woke up twice thinking I heard footsteps on the stairs. Every creak of the floorboards made me sit bolt upright. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my friend. Got a match. Not a nurse. You're going to want to see this in person. I met Jay at a quiet cafe in Windermere, tucked between a bookshop and a florist. It was drizzling outside, and the windows were fogged with condensation. He slid into the seat opposite me, a worn satchel in one hand and a serious look on his face. She's not who she said she was, he said, flipping open his laptop. She's not even a nurse. He turned the screen towards me. There, in bold, undeniable clarity, was the woman from the video. Same pinched mouth, same sharp cheekbones, same tired eyes. Only this time, she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was in a mugshot. Claire Redford, Jay said. Convicted in 2017 for identity fraud and perverting the course of justice. Served 18 months, out early on good behavior. She's been off the radar since. My stomach lurched. So Elliot hired a criminal to impersonate a nurse and witness the will? Jay nodded grimly. It looks that way. And guess what? She has known ties to a man named Gerald Langton. Solicitor, now struck off. Guess who he worked with for 5 years? Elliot's lawyer, I breathed. Mr. Harrow. Jay tapped the screen again. That's your link. And if you can prove this woman was impersonating a nurse, any will she signed as witness could be thrown out. My hands trembled as I sipped my coffee. Do we know where she is now? Jay's jaw tightened. No fixed address. But I've got a lead. She withdrew cash from a bank in Preston 3 days ago. CCTV shows her wearing a scarf and cap, but it's definitely her. She's moving. Fast. I nodded. Then we need to move faster. Back at home, things were changing. Elliot was more guarded than usual, taking calls behind closed doors, and the solicitor visits had stopped. Mum was even quieter, watching me like a shadow, uncertain whose side she belonged to anymore. I spent the night piecing together every scrap of information I had. Claire's file, the altered will, screenshots of the video, and a timeline of Elliot's interactions with Harrow and Langton. Jay sent me encrypted copies of everything, including the facial recognition report and a side-by-side of Claire in uniform versus her arrest photo. Then, in the early hours of the morning, I got a call. It was Jay again. His voice was tight. Urgent. She's here. A witness spotted her in a cafe in Barrow-in-Furness an hour ago. Same scarf and cap. I've texted you the address. I was out the door before I even finished pulling on my coat. The drive was long and tense, the road slick with rain. I kept checking the sat-nav like it might change, as though the destination could vanish before I arrived. My fingers gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The cafe was small, tucked under the railway bridge. I parked across the road and waited, watching from behind the wipers. People came and went, a man with a dog, a couple with a pram, a teenager with headphones, but none of them were her. Then I saw her. The scarf, the cap, the hunched shoulders. She glanced over her shoulder before pushing the door open. I followed, heart hammering. She sat at the corner table, half hidden behind a pillar, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. When she looked up, her eyes widened. I didn't give her a chance to run. Claire Redford, I said calmly, sliding into the seat opposite her. Or should I say Miss Beechcroft? She stared at me for a long moment. Then her face broke into a weary smile. I knew someone would find me eventually, she said. So what happens now? I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. Why did you do it, Claire? Why betray Elliot like that? He trusted you. Her eyes flickered with something between guilt and defiance, but she didn't speak at first. For a long moment, she seemed to be calculating whether she should say anything at all. You really don't know, do you? She said finally, her voice soft but sharp, like a blade sheathed in velvet. Elliot didn't trust me. He used me, just like he used everyone else. I frowned, unable to hide my confusion. What are you talking about? Claire took a deep breath and looked around, as though the walls might have ears. The cafe was quieter now, the rain tapping on the windows, blending with the murmur of distant voices. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Elliot never cared about you, not really, she said. He knew your father was going to leave everything to you. That's why he had me forge the will. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, you were just a pawn? You were helping him steal from me? She shook her head, her eyes distant. Not exactly. He promised me that after everything, I'd get my share. But that was before he found out I knew too much about his little secret. My mind raced. What secret? Claire's gaze hardened. Elliot isn't who you think he is. He's been involved in things that could ruin him if the wrong people found out. I leaned in closer. What kind of things? For a moment, Claire hesitated, clearly wrestling with whether to tell me. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Elliot's been laundering money for years, using your father's business as a front. He had a whole network, and he used his position to hide it all. The world seemed to tilt, and I had to catch my breath. That's impossible. Why didn't my father know? Claire looked at me with pity. Because your father trusted Elliot. He thought he was his protégé. But Elliot was playing a dangerous game. And when your father found out, that's when everything changed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father, the man I had always admired, had been deceived by the one person he had trusted most in the world. And that person was now sitting across from me, looking like someone who knew she was too far in to turn back. So, you were part of this whole thing? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. You were involved in laundering money and stealing from my father? Claire sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. I didn't have a choice. Elliot had me under his thumb. He threatened me, manipulated me. He made me think I was helping him take down the people who were controlling his life. But the will? I asked, my voice shaking. Why go that far? Why not just expose him? Her expression darkened. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about control. Elliot had me tied to him in ways I didn't even understand. When I started to back away, that's when he forced me to sign the will. He knew you would come after him. He knew you'd want revenge, and he was trying to get ahead of you. He thought he could take everything from you before you could take him down. I swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in. So, you were just a pawn in his game all along? Claire's lips curled into a bitter smile. We all were. But I'm done being his pawn. I want out. I stared at her, unsure of what to believe. Was she really just a victim in all of this? Or was she still hiding something? The questions swirled in my mind, and I knew there was more to the story. But for now, I had to focus on the one thing that mattered. Taking down Elliot before he destroyed everything. Where is he now? I asked, my voice low and steady. Claire hesitated, her eyes flickering towards the door. I don't know. He's been hiding out in a place he calls the Hollow. It's an old estate near the outskirts of Windermere. I don't know exactly where, but I can point you in the right direction. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Thank you. Claire's face softened for a moment, but then she glanced nervously over her shoulder. You need to be careful. Elliot's dangerous. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. I stood up, my mind racing. I know. But I have to stop him before he destroys everything. As I turned to leave, Claire called out to me. Wait. I stopped and looked back at her, my heart pounding in my chest. There's one more thing you should know, she said. Your father. He knew. He knew about Elliot. But he was too proud to admit it. That's why he made the will the way he did. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My father knew? He had suspected Elliot all along and still chose to leave everything to me? Before I could ask anything more, Claire turned away, her face hidden behind the scarf and cap once again. And just like that she was gone. I couldn't shake off Claire's words. My mind kept replaying them over and over as I made my way to the outskirts of Windermere, the rain still pouring down in relentless sheets. The weather seemed to mirror the chaos swirling inside me. My father had known about Elliot, and yet he still chose to leave everything to me. Why? Why would he do that if he suspected the man he'd taken in like a son had been using him all along? The estate Claire had mentioned, the Hollow, was exactly the kind of place that could conceal the dangerous secrets Elliot was hiding. The name alone sent a chill down my spine. An old forgotten place where shadows had a way of lingering. I had no idea what I would find when I got there, but I knew one thing for sure. Elliot would be expecting me. As I reached the secluded driveway that led to the estate, the trees surrounding me grew thicker, their branches twisting like skeletal hands in the dark. The wind howled through the empty grounds, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then, I remembered Claire's words. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. I couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. I had come too far to turn back. The gates of the hollow creaked open as I approached, the sound echoing through the mist. The house itself loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Its windows were like hollow eyes staring out at the world, and the air around it felt wrong. There was an eerie stillness to the place, as though it had been abandoned for years, yet something about it told me it was very much alive. I parked my car a few yards away from the entrance, the tires screeching on the wet gravel. Stepping out, I could feel the chill of the night settling in, the dampness seeping through my clothes. As I moved closer to the front door, I noticed something strange, a light flickering in the window, dim but unmistakable. Someone was inside. I approached cautiously, every step calculated. The house seemed to be holding its breath, the silence oppressive. When I reached the door, I hesitated for just a second before knocking. An unnecessary gesture, as the door swung open almost immediately. There was no one there to greet me. No welcoming face, no security guard, not even a hint of the lavishness I had expected from Elliot's hideout. Instead, the interior was cold, dimly lit by flickering chandeliers that seemed to be hanging on by a thread. The air smelled stale, like something had been left to rot inside for far too long. As I stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a secret, every shadow stretching out of sight just enough to make me uneasy. I moved forward, slowly, cautiously. I had to find Elliot, confront him, and end this madness once and for all. The grand staircase loomed ahead, its steps worn and crooked. As I climbed, I could hear the faintest sound. Footsteps, muffled but deliberate, coming from somewhere above. Was it him? Had he been waiting for me? Or was it something else entirely? The house had an unsettling way of twisting reality, of making you question everything. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated again. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and silent. The only sound was the faint creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline surging through me. Every instinct told me to turn back, to leave this cursed place behind. But I had come too far. I couldn't stop now. I moved forward, inch by inch, my breath shallow, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the house pressing in on me, the walls closing in as if they were alive, ready to swallow me whole. Then I saw him. Elliot was standing at the end of the hallway, his back to me, facing a large wooden door that I hadn't noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out from within. He didn't hear me approach, or maybe he didn't care. His posture was stiff, his shoulders hunched, as if he were preparing for something. Preparing for me. I didn't hesitate. I moved quickly, the tension in my limbs propelling me forward, and before he could turn around, I called out. Elliot! My voice was sharp, breaking through the silence like a crack of thunder. It's over. You can't keep running. He spun around at the sound of my voice, his face a mask of surprise and something else, something darker. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stood there, locked in a tense standoff. You shouldn't have come here, he said quietly, his voice cold and almost resigned. I took a step forward. I've come this far, Elliot. It's over. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You don't understand, do you? He said, shaking his head. It's never over. Not for me. Not for anyone involved. I narrowed my eyes, the pieces falling into place. You were never after the money, were you? This was never just about the inheritance. It was about control. It was about using everyone around you to keep the power you craved. Elliot's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. Power? Is that what you think this is about? No. It's about survival. It's about keeping my place in this world, no matter the cost. I took another step, the resolve in my chest hardening. At the cost of everyone else's happiness? You used me. You used Claire. You used my father. And for what? To cover up your own greed. His eyes flashed, but there was something almost tragic in them. You think it's that simple? You think I didn't care about what I did? That I didn't regret the choices I made? He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto mine. But I had no choice. No one ever does. I took a deep breath, my hand reaching for the edge of the door he had been facing. It's not too late, Elliot. You can still make this right. For a brief moment, there was hesitation in his eyes. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. He turned away, pushing the door open wider, revealing what lay behind it. I stepped inside, and that's when everything changed. The moment the door creaked open, I was hit with a rush of cold, stale air, the unmistakable scent of years of neglect. Inside the room, the shadows were dense, nearly tangible, as though the very walls were closing in around me. My heart raced in anticipation, knowing that this moment, this confrontation, was inevitable. Elliot was standing there, just inside the room, his back to me. The faint light from an old lamp cast eerie, elongated shadows across his face. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge my presence. It was as though he was waiting for something, or someone else to enter the room. Elliot, I called, my voice steady but carrying a hint of the emotion I could no longer suppress. I needed answers, and more importantly, I needed him to understand that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. At the sound of my voice, he slowly turned, his gaze sharp and calculating, as though he were trying to gauge my next move. There was a flicker of something, fear, regret, or maybe both, before he masked it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You shouldn't have come here, Olivia, he said, his voice low but firm, the kind of voice one uses when they know they're about to lose control. You've already lost. I took a step forward, my breath steady despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I'm not the one who's lost, Elliot, I replied, my words like daggers. You are. This all ends tonight. He shook his head, but there was no real conviction behind it. You think you can just waltz in here and take everything from me? You think you can undo what's been done? His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. You don't know what you're up against. I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. How could he still think he was the one in control? How could he still believe he had the upper hand when everything was falling apart? I don't need to know everything, Elliot, I said, taking another step. I know enough to understand that your plan has failed. You're cornered, and it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. For a moment, his expression shifted, anger mixed with desperation, and I knew that whatever game he had been playing, whatever scheme he had crafted, was coming to its end. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. You have no idea what I've sacrificed to get here, he spat, stepping forward now. His fists clenched at his sides. You have no idea what it's like to fight for everything, to have everything taken from you, and then have to claw your way back from nothing. I stood my ground, the weight of my father's betrayal still fresh in my mind. You didn't claw your way back, Elliot. You manipulated, you lied, you destroyed everything in your path for your own gain. You're not a victim, you're a villain. The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, but the truth had already sunk in. He was no longer the man who had once taken me under his wing. He was a stranger to me now, a man consumed by his own ambitions. Elliot seemed to deflate slightly, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the truth was finally settling on him. But then he straightened, the coldness returning to his eyes. You think I'm going to just let you walk away, Olivia? You think I'm going to let you expose everything I've worked for? His voice was cold, cutting through the silence. You don't understand. This isn't just about money or power. This is about survival. If I don't do this, if I don't take control, I lose everything. I shook my head. You lost everything the moment you chose to betray the people who cared about you. You lost your humanity, Elliot. The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating, until I heard a faint sound, a creak from behind me. I turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the darkness at the edge of the room. My breath caught in my throat as I realized who it was. Claire. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and in her hand, she was holding a small metal object. It was a gun. Claire, I breathed, my voice faltering as I took a step towards her. What are you doing? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flickered between Elliot and me, and for a moment, it seemed like she didn't know what to do, like she was frozen in place. I had to, she said finally, her voice shaking. I couldn't let him. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes flicking to Elliot. I couldn't let him hurt anyone else. Elliot's eyes widened as he saw the gun in her hand. You've gone mad, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you can stop me with that? Claire shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I'm not going to let you do this anymore, Elliot. I'm not going to let you destroy everything we've worked for. The tension in the room became unbearable, the weight of her words hanging over us like a storm cloud. It was a standoff, one I never expected. A battle between all the lies, manipulation, and pain we had suffered at his hands. I glanced between Claire and Elliot, feeling the gravity of the situation bearing down on me. I knew what Claire had been through, the pressure she had been under all these years. She was just as trapped as I was, as we all were. The difference now was that she had finally taken control. You've made a choice, Claire, Elliot said softly, almost pleading now. Put the gun down. We can work this out. We can still. No, she interrupted, her voice firm, almost stronger than I had ever heard it. It's over. For a moment, there was a silence that felt like it lasted a lifetime, but then in a split second, everything changed. Elliot stood frozen, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. For a brief moment, his eyes flickered, a brief crack in the armor he had so carefully crafted over the years. He had underestimated me, and now the truth was out in the open. I didn't have a choice, Olivia, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand what it's like. You don't know what it means to survive. To claw your way to the top when everyone is trying to push you down. It's not just about money. It's about power. Control. I met his gaze, my heart racing but my resolve firm. No. Elliot. It was never about survival. You did this because you wanted to win. You wanted to crush everyone in your path, even if it meant destroying the people who cared about you. There was no answer. Only silence, heavy and suffocating. The air in the room felt thick, and I could almost hear the pulse of tension between us. I could see the desperation in his eyes, but it was no longer the pleading desperation of someone who wanted redemption. It was the panic of a man who knew his world was crumbling, his empire of lies collapsing piece by piece. He took a step back, his eyes darting to the gun Claire still held in her shaking hands. You think you're in control, Claire? He sneered, his voice laced with venom. You think you've won? I'm the one who built everything. I'm the one who made you. Without me, you'd still be nothing. But Claire wasn't intimidated. She stood tall, her grip tightening on the weapon. Without you, I'd be free, she said, her voice filled with determination. I would have been free from your lies, from the fear you instilled in me. I would have been able to live my life the way I wanted, not the way you dictated. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in Elliot's eyes that I hadn't seen before. Guilt. It was fleeting, but it was there. You think you can just walk away from all of this, Claire? He said, his voice shaking now. You think you can just undo all the damage I've done? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. I don't know what's going to happen now, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I know this. I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else. I won't be part of your games anymore. I won't let you control me. Her words, though simple, were heavy with meaning. This was the final moment of truth for Claire. She had been trapped in Elliot's web for so long, but now, she was taking the first step towards freedom. I could see the conflict in her eyes, but I also saw the strength she had finally found in herself. Elliot's expression hardened, the last vestiges of his false confidence slipping away. You'll regret this, both of you, he spat, his voice cold. I promise you, you'll regret it. He turned then, making a move toward the door, but before he could reach it, Claire stepped forward, blocking his path. Her gun was steady now, no longer shaking in her hands. She had made her decision. You don't get to walk away, she said quietly but with finality. Elliot's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. He was cornered, and he knew it. But instead of surrendering, instead of giving up, he did what he had always done. He fought back. With a sudden violent motion, he lunged at Claire, knocking the gun out of her hands and sending it skidding across the floor. The room erupted into chaos as Elliot and Claire struggled, their bodies locked in a desperate battle. I rushed forward, grabbing hold of Elliot's arm, trying to pull him off Claire, but he was stronger than I expected. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, the sharp gasps for air as we struggled in the dim light of the room. But then, with a flash of movement, Claire regained control. She kicked Elliot in the stomach, sending him stumbling back. It was enough. In that split second, I grabbed the gun from the floor and pointed it at him. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice trembling, but filled with authority. "It's over, Elliot. You've lost." For a moment, Elliot just stared at me, his chest heaving with rage. Then slowly, he raised his hands in mock surrender, his lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've just done." I held the gun steady, my finger hovering near the trigger. "I know exactly what I've done," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos. "I've stopped you from destroying any more lives." Elliot's smile faded, his eyes darkening with an emotion I couldn't quite place. But then, with one last defiant glare, he turned and walked toward the door. He didn't try to fight anymore. He didn't even look back. As he exited the room, the tension in the air began to dissipate, but the reality of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. I had won. We had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something much darker, a chapter in our lives that would never be the same again. I looked at Claire, and for the first time, I saw her as she truly was. Free. She had taken control of her own fate, just as I had. And for that I was grateful. The room was silent now, save for the sound of our heavy breathing. We stood there for a long time, processing the aftermath of what had just transpired. But despite everything, one thing was clear. The fight was over, and the truth had finally come to light. The words Claire spoke lingered in the room like a heavy echo. The finality of her statement hung in the air, almost tangible, as if marking the end of a long drawn-out war. Elliot, his expression now a mask of fury and disbelief, took a moment to process her words. His eyes darted from Claire to me, his lips curling in contempt. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won? You've only just begun to understand what it takes to be in control," he spat, voice dripping with venom. I took a deep breath, my hand steady on the gun I still held. "No, Elliot. The only thing that's changed is that we no longer fear you." The tension in the room was unbearable. It felt like the calm before a storm, the final moments before the world as we knew it would shift forever. For the first time, I realized something important. Elliot had already lost. No matter how he tried to twist the situation, his power had already crumbled. He had fought for control, for dominance, but in the end, it was his own actions that had torn everything apart. His arrogance, his cruelty, those were the things that had brought him to this moment. And there was no escaping it now. He had underestimated us, and that was his downfall. For a long moment, Elliot simply stared at us, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He looked around the room, and for the first time, his eyes betrayed something else. Fear. He had always thought he was untouchable, always believed that he could manipulate everyone around him. But now, in this room with nothing left to manipulate, he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Then, without warning, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy as he fled. We didn't try to stop him. There was no point. He had nothing left. No power, no influence. The man who had once controlled everything had now been reduced to nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as though the world had paused for a moment, giving us a chance to breathe, to process everything that had just happened. The storm had passed, but the wreckage was all around us. Claire and I stood in the middle of the room, the weight of the moment sinking in. It was over. We had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the beginning of something new. I glanced at Claire, who stood beside me, her eyes tired but resolute. There was a sense of peace in her expression now, something that had been missing for so long. She had faced her demons, and in doing so, she had freed herself. And that freedom, that liberation, was more powerful than any victory we could have claimed. "I don't know what comes next," Claire said, her voice quiet but steady. "But I do know one thing. I'm not going back to what I was. I'm not going to let the past define me anymore." I nodded, understanding the depth of her words. The past could no longer hold either of us captive. We had both been trapped in the web of Elliot's lies, but now we were free. And together we could move forward. As we left the room, the world outside felt different. The air was clearer, the sky brighter. The weight of our burdens had been lifted, and though we didn't know exactly what the future would hold, we knew one thing. We were free. The shadows of the past had been cast away, and in their place was a new, uncertain horizon, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful for the future. Hopeful for a life that was no longer defined by fear or control. Hopeful for a chance to rebuild, to start again. Claire and I walked out into the bright light of a new day, side by side. It was a small step, but it was a step toward freedom. A step toward something better. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.